All right, guys, let me ask you this quick question while we get started this morning. What for you, where do you get the inspiration and the focus every day to stay fired up? Go ahead in the chat, like where do you put it? Or if someone wants to unmute, where do you get your inspiration, your mindset focus? How do you recenter yourself every day? That's going to look different. Some people are like, you know what, man, I wake up every day and literally the bills, I just check my bank account and that's all the motivation I need. Some people are like, dude, I hop onto YouTube and I watch a Tony Robbins thing and I get a little bit of fired up. I got a guy in my life that his name is Scott Vitello, and he's a guy I met at a conference, funny enough. And I had spoken at a conference before with John Chaplack, and I got off stage, and this guy sent me like this message, and we got to chatting. And every day, I'm not joking, guys, check this out. Every single day, every day since September of 2022, that guy has sent me an inspirational video. This is wild. This guy has been like, constantly trying to get me motivated every day. I don't know if he knows this, but I'm like pretty motivated on my own. Let's see what Adam says. Adam says exercise. Elise says, I've been asking myself if 10-year-old or 16-year-old me would be proud of me. Whoa. And how I choose to spend my day. That's a really cool and interesting perspective, Elise. In psychology and in therapy, there is an activity that is self-based in which the person imagines themselves, their younger self that lives within inside of them, and asks them questions. And that question is then responded back to. The reciprocal work can also be done, which is a coaching strategy in which you imagine your 85-year-old self, 80-year-old, 90-year-old self, whatever that is, and you listen to the wisdom that they have for you. And that's a really interesting one, Elise. Cool stuff there. Jordan says exercise to start the morning and tons of coffee. Amen to that, man. Love that coffee. And Lillian says workout, move my body every morning. Well, guys, I wanted to just, I sent out a text message this morning and it got a lot of response from those. Sometimes people reply, sometimes people don't, whatever. I don't care. I'm going to send it out anyways. I just want you guys, this is no expectation to reply to my morning text messages. That's not the point. But this morning I woke up at 4:45 and I had this little bit of like whisper that happened about like, hey, what's your purpose? And I felt like I needed to talk to you guys about that. And so often, people struggle with this idea of purpose. They're like, what am I supposed to do in my life? And if you've ever wondered that of like what I'm supposed to do with my life, put that in the chat. Put yes in the chat. Put no if you've never wondered. But if you've ever wondered, like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, do I have a purpose? Do I have a calling? Is there like something I'm supposed to accomplish here? Again, I'm not going to try to, whatever. Put whatever you want or didn't even participate. I don't care. But if you've ever felt that way, then it can be really like existential and almost like frustrating. You're like, what am I doing? Like I go and I literally show houses all day long to people. And is there a point to this? Like I get paid and then the money goes right out the door and I pay my bills and I do all my stuff. And sometimes I'm just like, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. Like, am I supposed to accomplish something in my life? And so at 4:45 in the morning, I was like, all right, well, if that's the message I need to talk about today, then I'll talk about it. And so I read this verse this morning. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And I thought to myself about how often in life we're like a piece of metal that's being formed to do something. But in the beginning, in the process, we actually don't know what we're going to do. And sometimes people have like an idea for what it is. And I want to be clear about this. You can have an idea for what your purpose and your calling is in your life, but you don't know how it's going to get formed. And I'm going to give you an example from personal experience here about what that looks like. So I want you to imagine yourself, maybe Elise will do this, you imagine yourself as a 10-year-old or 16-year-old, and you probably thought of what you wanted to do. And imagine yourself as a piece of metal there that is going to get fashioned into some tool that's going to be used, right? Like some purpose that you have. Like, can you imagine if like there's just, a piece of metal and it sits around, and imagine this inanimate object can have, a conversation. It looks over at a knife and it's like, man, you have purpose in your life. You're sharp. You can do things. You can cut things. You can wow, that's so incredible. And then it looks over at another piece of metal. It's like, oh my gosh, you're part of a car. You did something like that. You have a purpose. And if you've ever met somebody who has purpose in their life and has a mission in their life and is like on the move and they've got intention behind what they're doing, it's almost like it's contagious. You're like, I wish I had that fire inside of me. I want that sort of fire inside of myself. In the same way that you can imagine this inanimate like piece of metal has. But you have to ask yourself the question of how that piece of raw material gets to be something that is actually useful. You have to think about that. How did it get there? And it doesn't get there by any other means than by being sharpened, than by being molded, than by things happening to it that are otherwise uncomfortable. I mean, think about the experiences in your life that have led you to be able to become the person you are today. We often see the finished places in people's lives, and we look at them from the outside, and we see the exterior of who they are. We see that finished area in their life, and we wonder, or we see that disparity between ourselves and them. We look at their exteriors, and we see our interiors. We see the shortcomings in our own self, and yet we look at the finished places, as I call them, in other people. You know exactly what I'm talking about, the finished places of that sales agent that sells a lot of real estate. Oh, if that's them. And we give excuse to this, don't we? We give excuse to the reasons behind how someone got there. Oh, well, that person's good looking. Well, that person just has a great personality. Well, that person had a family member that was in real estate. Well, that person has a big sphere of influence. So that person is just really good at talking. Well, that person is this or that or the other thing. We see I put it in my chat this morning, we see a great dad. If you're a father here, then you know exactly what I mean. You want to be a good father. And yet sometimes you lose your patience. Or, you know what? I feel distracted. Or, you know what? I just really don't want to show up right now and have to do this. I just want to sit on the couch for a minute. That's the insides. But becoming a great dad, we see the other guy who just does something super well, is spending time with his kids. He's constantly present, it looks like. He's always home. He's doing something for his family. You see the finished places, and comparison sets in. This happens all the time. But the reality is that the finished places in our lives are often developed through the sharpening that happens when no one sees it. It happens in the dark place. It happens in that shadow. It happens when no one's looking. And so I want to encourage you this morning. Today is a morning which you won't remember. You won't. In about 2 weeks from now, I'll ask you, what did you wear today? And I can only see Nick and I can see Michaela. And Michaela won't remember what she wore, some brown coat, I don't know. And Nick's got on some Yukon outfit, right? You won't remember. You probably won't remember what you had for breakfast. You probably won't remember the phone calls you made today if you make your phone calls. You probably won't remember a lot of the conversations. But there's sharpening that happens every day, a little bit. And the hardest part about sharpening it is uncomfortable by nature. It is uncomfortable when you think about a piece of metal that gets sharpened by anything else. Think about a blade that gets sharpened, or if you can imagine, when you were a kid, you used to see these like little things where the guy was sharpening an axe and he'd be like pedaling away and there's this like wheel that's spinning and he's sharpening it. And there's sparks that fly and it's not fun. But this happens all the time in relationships. It happens all the time in business. It happens everywhere. It happens in your personal relationship with your significant other. You guys have a fight and you're like, dang it, that sucks. I don't want that in my life. It happens in your business relationships where your deal falls through or something happens. And those are the sparks that happen. But the difference is this, my friends. The one who gets sharpened is the one who puts themselves back on to get sharpened again. He keeps going back. He keeps going back to the wheel to get sharpened. He keeps going back to the honing knife to continue to get sharpened. It is only the person who quits and walks away that stays the same. They wonder, that person who stays the same and quits, they look back at the sharpened object that's out there and they say, oh, that's the reason why. Well, they're this. They just have a good personality, or you know what, that guy's just naturally patient, or he doesn't know what's going on in my life, right? That's the classic one, the big victim, right? Well, they don't know what's going on in my life. I remember one time I was in a I was in a real estate office, my first real estate office I ever was in. I was running around and I did not demand excellence on a certain listing. And there was an older lady there. Her name was Ode, and she was a very wealthy lady. And I had already prejudged her as her success, etc. And I was running and I didn't do something right. And she called me out on it. She said, David, you didn't do that. And I remember standing up. It's a very open office space. There was only a few of us, a small boutique shop called Engel and Volkers. And I remember turning around to her and I remember saying, you don't know what's going on in my life. You have no idea what's on my plate. Big old victim. Big old victim. I didn't want to go to the sharpening. I didn't want to go. Why? Because Ode was pointing out something in my life about demand excellence, that she was trying to call me up to be something better than I was. Yep. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't be like how I was. Instead, I needed to apologize. So I apologized to Ode, put myself back on the sharpening, put myself back there, because I knew that Ode was trying to make me better. Ode was trying to help me there. So what does this look like for you today? Well, my first example is this. Sharpening doesn't happen without intention. Sharpening doesn't happen without intention. We have to put ourselves in the place where we are going to get sharpened every day. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intention. You know, you must come to acceptance, come to a place of acceptance in your life where you say, I'm going to get sharpened. I'm going to go there. I know that every day is not about finding my own comfort. It's about becoming and walking further into my purpose. I'll tell you this, guys. I want to ask you this story. Have you ever become so comfortable enough that you don't need any more comfort? Ask yourself that question. Have you ever been so comfortable that you don't need any more comfort? The answer is no. There's always something more. There's always another higher level of service. There's always another greater level of pampering or whatever it is. But I'll tell you this, there's nothing as fulfilling in your life as walking in your purpose, as to walking in your calling. Because when you do that, you know everything else, you're like, you feel like I was made for this. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life. It doesn't matter what storm's happening in your world. You've got purpose behind yourself. And that only happens when we get ourselves sharpened. My second example for you this morning is this. Sharpening typically doesn't just happen alone. There is a part of sharpening that happens alone, but there's a different type of sharpening that happens together. And what I mean by that is, you know, without that lady Ode who was in the room to spot my blind spot, I wouldn't have noticed it. In fact, I would have kept going and doing the things that I would have done. I would have just continued to operate and try to do the shortcuts, etc. It's faster to go alone. It's faster. But when you're in community with others, they can see your blind spots. They can notice for you, here's the things that you're missing, and here's the things that where you could grow. It also works in the reverse. You get the encouragement that happens from being in community. Yesterday, someone on the team gave me a call, and they were concerned about what to do. There was a big decision that they had to make in their life. And I gave them a little bit of advice, not to tell them which direction to go in, but I was just able to say this. Here's one thing that I see about you. I've noticed this core competency that you have in your life that's unlike any other. It's a superpower. And because I know your story, you overcame something very hard in your life. And because of that, now you have the reciprocal. You have a superpower because of it. And that person was like, dude, I need to do that. I need to step into that thing. And often enough, I keep getting reminded, it's what we overcome in our lives. It's the time of sharpening in our lives that often becomes the superpower for where we're at. I'll close you out with this story here. It was a long time ago, probably when I was 8 years old, I already knew what I wanted to do in my life. At first it was 5, I wanted to be in the Air Force. That was fun. You know, and that was about it. But then by the time I was 8, I wanted to be like my grandfather. And my grandfather was, you know, he was a really meaningful guy who happened to, you know, spend a lot of his time in his community and his church. And that's what I wanted to do for my life. I remember being so convicted of it that there's nothing else that I ever considered doing. When I was in high school, people were like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to be a youth pastor. And they were like, oh, why is that? And I was like, because I want to benefit and help people who are at, you know, huge decision points in their lives. And I remember in that time, I was like, okay, great. This is awesome. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get this degree, and then I'm going to work at a church for the rest of my life. And that didn't happen. In fact, my mother's second husband, And when I mean second, I'll tell you she's not on her second anymore. Her second husband went on heroin. And I got a phone call and had to go home and help pay the rent. And I noticed as this piece of metal that I thought was going to be sharpened in a certain way, to be this tool to be worked on, to have my purpose in my life, was getting sharpened in a completely different way than I thought. I remember standing up to a person who, if you've ever looked at a person with addiction in their eyes, they look through you. They look through you. It suddenly became a means to an end to sell the snowblower, the tools in the garage, and everything else in order to pay for their addiction. Meanwhile, people are back at college, graduating, figuring it out. It's not a sob story. This is how you get sharpened. Suddenly you go to figure out, I don't have a degree and I don't have any skills. And the best thing I can do is wait a table. And that's the fastest way I can make money. And it's there that I learned how to talk to people. You see, sometimes the path to reach where you need to go is not the direct path. It's the indirect path. It's the one that leads you in a way you don't know what's going to happen in your life and how it's going to lead you and how it's going to get you sharpened. And I found myself waiting tables and learning that. It wouldn't be until months later, actually years later, that I would go to South Africa, that I would sit on the edge of a beach, that I would hear a word to go work in construction. And then one day I woke up, and today I felt in my heart, today's the day. And I remember driving, turn left here, turn right here. And I remember pulling off to a subdivision that's now called Tunxis Heights in Bloomfield, where I felt in my heart, go ask for a job. I got out of my car. I saw an old man walking down a hill. And I said, hey, my name is David Brook, and I'm here for a job. The guy said, are you freaking kidding me? I said, no. He said, well, I just fired a guy at the top of the hill, and I was going down to my truck to go to the office and post for a job. And I asked him for a job. I got into construction. Construction led to appraising. Appraising led to real estate. Real estate led me to be a team leader, led me to this morning with you that we'll probably never remember again. My friends, the whole point and purpose of becoming who we are, to becoming that highly purposeful person in our lives, to being that formidable object, is the sharpening. It is the time of sharpening. It's not always the direct path. Life is not always the straightforward, easy thing. It has these crazy amounts of time that are spent in complete silence, where you barely hear anything of wonder or worth, where you're just spending time sharpening. The question that I have for you today is, are you going to show up and get sharpened today? Are you going to show up and do the hard thing? Are you going to show up and practice? Are you going to shoot the free throws when no one's looking in the gym and you're learning how? You're going to practice and you're going to go and you're going to lift the weights when no one's around, you don't look that great, and you're just trying to lose a little bit? Are you going to show up and make calls when no one else is in the office and you're just there to try to book an appointment? You're going to get rejected and you're just going to keep going. There's a tale of two different people, those who face it and want to be sharpened and those who don't. But I will guarantee you this, and I'll wrap up with this. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. If you go and get sharpened today, you will find amazing purpose in your life that will fulfill you beyond anything you could ever work for. Thanks, guys, for joining me this morning. Hopefully this is impactful in your lives. It is a pleasure to be along this road with you, helping you sharpen me, and I get that honor every day. See you guys.